A new record was set for Indian Airlines on November 17 as they surpassed the 5 lakh figure for air travelers ferried on a single day. The exact figure was 5 lakh 5,412. And this is only the number for air travelers flying on domestic routes. The high came exactly 2 Sundays after Diwali. The 5.05 lakh figure was 11% more than the highest single-day passenger traffic recorded in 2023 in the month of April, and 16% more than what was recorded in 2022 in the month of December. To unpack what this signifies and how India is traveling, where is the demand for travel growing, and how are travel booking portals wooing first-time flyers, I have with me the co-founder and CEO of ixigo, Aloke Bajpai. Hi, Alok. Welcome to this chat and for agreeing to do this on such a short notice.
Hi, Jagriti. Thank you for having me here. It'll be fun, I'm sure.
Yes. So those figures are really, like akin to a Diwali bonanza for the travel industry, even though this came about 2 weeks after the big festival. Just explain to us why is this 5 lakh figure that various airlines have recorded on November 17th is such a big deal, and what were the driving factors for such big numbers?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this has to do with the wedding season, which has been exceptionally strong this particular year, right? In fact, just to give you perspective, Diwali or pre-Diwali, the run-up to Diwali is something where every year OTAs or airlines do see, a run-up in demand. What was unusual this year was the week right after Diwali is where demand started to hit new highs, right, for most players, and those bookings largely were for the marriage season, which began on the 12th onwards, and 17th, 18th were also pretty strong dates in terms of marriages, right? So there was a lot of that in there, and of course, this being also the part of the year where you do have in some parts of India. I mean, right now you have elections going on in Maharashtra, and there's obviously that's leading to a little more travel towards or from that place, right? And of course, there's also the fog or the smog, I should say, in Delhi, which is the pollution levels have just gone sky high, and that actually started last week, right? So it's become a kind of trend we are seeing where the outside of the 4 metros you see, even in tier 2, 3 cities, right, in the north, right, some people are taking breaks just to get away from the pollution, right, and I think all these factors are contributing there. In my sense, wedding being the biggest one, because we saw not just on 17th but also in the days in the run up to 17th and couple of days even after that, right, we are at higher levels than what one would see post Diwali, because post Diwali it does subside a bit, right, but this time it actually reached a new high.
So it's interesting, Alok, that you mentioned that even the rising levels of pollution that we're seeing in cities like Delhi is responsible for the slight growth in passenger demand. How do you arrive at that sort of a conclusion? Is it based on the destinations where people are headed?
Yes, partly. I think partly that and partly anecdotal evidence. Speaking to people around, I also live in Gurgaon, and there is definitely there's definitely a subset of people who are escaping the city of sorts, in this part of the year, and destination wise, one thing we've noticed is that because airfares last minute, the spot fares are actually quite high, and partly because the marriage season has filled up quite much of the load factors, right? And therefore, the spot fares are actually trending higher. People are actually making last minute escapes to even international destinations, right? And we've seen this not just for Middle East and Southeast Asia, which has been usual, but even for places like Sri Lanka or Central Asia, right? People are making trips which are booked like 24 or 48 hours in advance, because you don't need a visa, or you get a visa on arrival for most of the places that we are seeing this uptick into, right? And I think that's something which I believe there are two triggers. I mean, one is obviously from the north, the pollution, but there's also the fact that people are taking more frequent and short trips, right? So one pattern we've noticed post-COVID is that the frequency of trips has actually gone up, and sometimes the length of these trips have reduced. So people would club a long weekend or just take a Monday off and do like a 3-day trip, as opposed to wait for that long, let's say, Christmas, New Year break, right? Which was the pattern which was dominant pre-COVID. So I think that's something we've started to see. One more thing is very interesting, that the behavior for senior citizens, right? I mean, and the fact that recent reports have indicated that because of longevity, or because of the fact that the population in India has also started to age in that sense, although we don't talk much about it because we are a young nation, but there is a bunch of senior citizens who have the time and the money to actually take breaks during this part of the year, and because they're also the most vulnerable when it comes to pollution, right? We've seen some of those people actually take a break out of the northern cities which are impacted by this. And this is something I'm talking just the last 1 week behavior. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting that you mentioned that. Also, I mean, I will come to you a little later on the consumer behavior, and other tips, maybe even for travelers. But I wanted to understand, we are still in the middle of the peak travel season, and how do you see demand for the next 1 month or so? Do you expect higher numbers, from the 5.05 that we've seen? Do you expect this to keep growing for the next 1 month or so before we enter again a lean season?
Yeah, I think 5+ was obviously a big peak, and it's a function of two things from here. One is the run up to Christmas, New Year, and that's where I think we should see the next peak for sure. In the second half of December, but in the run up to that, we have one more marriage season, which is starting next week, essentially, right? And I think, in fact, starting in a few days, and in that sense, we might see another peak in the next few days of a similar quantum, and then the next big peak, which might even beat this one, because remember that every month we are also adding a new, a few new planes. Indigo is probably adding like 4 or 5 new planes a month, right? The way we look at it right now, and some additions are also expected from SpiceJet and others. So I think if that starts to happen, that will also lead to some capacity coming in, and Pratt and Whitney issue related. I think the Indigo management had indicated in their earning call that they are progressively clawing back some of those planes as well. So the from 60 planes out of service, they expect by next quarter it to come down to 40 planes out of action, right? So I think some of those planes, as they start coming in, should also feed into expansion of passenger segments sold. Last but not the least, I think international is something very interesting. Like you would have seen the numbers for all the OTAs that international has been growing faster than domestic the last 4 to 6 quarters. And one of the reasons is that on many of these routes, the pricing is very attractive, right? In terms of, you look at Vietnam, you look at even Central Asia, like places like Georgia, places like Azerbaijan, places like even Turkey now, right? Have very accessible fares, and I think that's something we should see continuing to, that trend will continue playing out and accelerate towards the Christmas New Year break, because that's when a lot of people take international trips.
All right. So just to sort of explain to our viewers, the Pratt and Whitney issue that Alok was referring to is about the engine problems that Indigo was facing, as a result of which they've seen a large number of planes grounded, as high as 70 planes grounded. But as Alok mentioned, they're planning to restore some of that. They're also leasing, and other airlines are simultaneously adding and growing their fleet. SpiceJet plans to bring back some planes. Air India is also expanding. They have plans to add one plane every 6 days, and Indigo's been adding one plane every week, barring the lull that we saw during COVID. So, capacity, you say, will continue to grow. Just give me an indication of how fares behaved in the past few weeks. We've seen that airlines announced quite a few discount schemes, and that is quite unusual for this time of the year, given that demand is typically at peak.
I think part of that was, if you noticed, in September, like towards the end of September, early October, right, there was some tapering on the load factor side, right? I think there was some softening on the load factors, and we saw some airline sales starting to happen in October, but in the first couple of weeks in November, particularly with Indigo, we saw, like the kind of sale that we don't see very often, right? In terms of fares being very attractively priced, especially for 30 days advance purchase, right? So I think, which is why, I'm more hopeful now that in December we'll hit more new highs, because some of that purchase behavior was for advance purchase in December and beyond, right? And I think it did stimulate the market. It did make many of those people planning to go to other cities for weddings or even spiritual trips, starting to come in. I mean, just to give you perspective, like tier 2, 3 is also a big driver here. We saw in Varanasi or in some of these smaller towns, Ayodhya, for example, towards Ayodhya or Varanasi, we've seen like a double-digit month-on-month growth, right? And Varanasi, I can even share some numbers because they were mind-boggling. Like year on year, at least for us, we've seen like a 265% jump in searches and bookings, right? And it's quite unusual to see that, but it's also quite expected because the infra is improved, the accessibility is improved, there's more connectivity, there's more flights flying in, and we see a similar behavior starting to happen in Ayodhya as well, with better connectivity. There's it's not just Delhi connected to Ayodhya, but you now have flights from Bombay, Bangalore, and other places as well. And then you have Gorakhpur and other such places also starting to pick up, right, with similar triple-digit year-on-year growth, right? So I think in that sense, these tier 2, tier 3 towns are also contributing a lot to the kind of behavior we are seeing. And coming to your question, I think, look, on the fare side, 30-day fares were, we saw like about 10% cheaper than they usually are, right? In some cases, 20% cheaper than they usually were. But the spot fares, 10 to 20% higher, right now. So if you look at the last minute fare today for any destination, you will see a 10-20% higher fare than what you usually expect in a spot fare. So it's kind of getting compensated by that, which is fueling very good advance purchase behavior. So we've seen expansion of the booking window a little bit leading up to the Christmas New Year. So I think that's net good for the airline industry, because you have better visibility on fill up of the planes, right, well in advance.
So were the discounts because of the higher capacity in the market?
Look, I wouldn't know what actually led to the airlines actually running those discounts. But like I said, in September, October, there was some softening of load factors that we saw, right? And that could have led to conclusion that, the market needs to be stimulated. But I think that's now, I mean, all those sales are kind of attractive fares were largely in the first half of the month, right? So right now we don't see that sort of persisting And because the load factors right now that we are seeing, I mean, at least at 90 plus load factors on most routes, with that kind of load factor, there's no need to continue these at this point. But who knows how December will pan out. If there's more capacity, this could come back again in December.
Yeah. Okay. Alok, you mentioned about smaller towns, Varanasi, Gorakhpur, etc. And though Varanasi is a temple town, so is Ayodhya. This growth, as you've mentioned in the past, is not confined to just these temple towns, and it's probably across the country. What is this shift? How much do metros account for in terms of growth in traffic demand, and what is the shift that you're seeing from metro to tier 2 and tier 3 cities? We know that whereas airlines also have plans to massively expand their network to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, with an airline like Air India Express saying that they're going to their primary focus is going to be these cities.
Yeah, no, I think, look, at least at ixigo, where our focus is really very much on tier 2, 3 towns, right? Because we are the largest player in the OTA space in trains, second largest on buses. So we have this huge catchment area of tier 2, 3 travelers. And what we have seen is a material acceleration in essentially them moving up the funnel, right? And booking flights. And now that could be driven by two things. One is that, remember that on trains, not much capacity expansion happens, right? I mean, essentially, yes, we do have new Vande Bharat trains coming in and all that, but it's like a 5 to 6% a year kind of a capacity expansion, and the demand far outstrips supply there. So almost a third of train tickets sold are actually waitlisted tickets, right? And so in that sense, there is a lot of spillover demand that comes into the flight funnel across the industry, right? So there's a lot of people who will not have a confirmed ticket on the last day. They've booked a waitlisted ticket, and then probably the prediction trend is indicating that it's not going to confirm in the next 1 week. So you're more likely to then find an alternate means of transport, either a bus or a flight. And that sort of behavior kind of accelerates the growth of flights, especially from and to these tier 2, 3 towns, which traditionally people would have always taken a train to. But now that there's airport connectivity, right, and there's enough flights flying in and out, you have places like Lucknow, Patna, etc. The fares are also quite affordable when you compare with a train. It's not like the fare is 5 times more, but actually, sometimes, it's like probably just a 500 or 1,000 rupee difference between a third AC fare. If you look at the last minute flight fare, even there, the difference is not more than 2,000 rupees, right? So at times, if you actually have that need to travel, and you have no other option, you do end up taking a flight. So that is part of the India story in general as well, because the per capita income, as it improves, especially in these tier 2, 3, 4 towns, the preferred mode of transport may shift, right, from default train or default bus to a default flight. And I think ixigo is benefiting also because we are right in the center of that action, right, in terms of seeing that shift happen, in front of our eyes, right? And we have seen for places like, if you look at Srinagar, 97% year-on-year growth, Guwahati 80%, Patna almost 70%, right? And this is way faster than how we are seeing our metro growth shape up, right? So I think in that sense, at least from the data we see, and it might be biased because of the reason that we are more penetrated there. For us, we see non-metros driving a large part of that growth, right? And metros are also growing fast, but non-metros are far outpacing them.
I want to ask you, I mean, as an online travel booking portal, how do you sort of ensure this transparency? And booking portals have come in for a fair bit of criticism about regarding dark patterns, the hidden either convenience fee or the way things get mysteriously added to your basket, or the way they are pushed again and again. You'll be sent a reminder on the page Are you sure you don't want to buy this? Are you sure you want to travel insecure, without an insurance? So how do you sort of ensure transparency? Or is this time for tighter regulation? Does the government need to step in and say, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that?
Well, I think the CCPA and other bodies have set very clear norms around this now. So compared to earlier, where I remember a time when people used to have everything on opt out, which means everything was already checked, right? Like many, many years ago, that was the norm on almost not just travel. I'm saying any industry, you would have a lot of add-ons pre-checked. And I remember right from the time when, like, before I started ixigo as in Europe, and EasyJet and Ryanair, etc. They were notorious for this, right? I mean, and I think today we've reached a point, at least in the industry, where I see that most of the players are actually following ethical norms in terms of saying, okay, there's nothing that's opt out, everything's opt in, first of all, right? And I mean, at least I can speak for ourselves that there's nothing being sneaked into your basket, right? As in that sense. And secondly, look, unless something is actually beneficial for a customer, I will not nudge them for it, right? But if it is beneficial for the customer, I will definitely nudge them for it, because later on they will actually suffer if they do not realize that it's valuable, right? So that's the way to think about. Every portal in the world has a couple of lines to tell them about any add-on product, right? Because if you ask, and by the way, our numbers are publicly disclosed, right? So almost 28% of transactions on ixigo, a value-added service is purchased as an opt-in, right? Now, if it wasn't valuable for them, why would people opt in that value-added service, right? Now, and because we've been through this, like I just spoke about it, that you want to modify your flight, people come asking you for more money, you want to modify your train booking, it's not possible. You have to first cancel and then book another ticket, and then it costs more, right? And if there are products that we have built which help make that process simpler to consume, and we are charging a small fee for it, I don't see a problem in doing that. And most OTAs are doing that. I think the question is that consumers, I think you have to be transparent about the terms and conditions, right? You have to be transparent about what is being paid for and when are you. So if you see our products, we have the TNCs upfront, and you can see more detailed ones in one click, right? And I think you have to, end of the day, look, we are building a business that has to exist for the long term. So there's no added benefit of doing something which is short term, right? In terms of what we do with customers, right? And that's how the travel industry has to look. Gone are the days, right, where travel used to be a place where there were a bunch of fly-by-night agents who would do random things, and then because they wouldn't care if you wanted to book with them again, etc. Right now, we have professional. In fact, most of the OTAs are listed now, right? So you have professional companies which are listed on stock exchanges, which have very stringent regulatory and compliance requirements. And therefore, I think it's net good for the consumer that all of them abide by what the respected norms are. And, I can just speak for ourselves that, we're very particular about being upfront about this. In fact, we go to another level, right? Because if you look at refunds, right? If you look at unanswered calls, right? People don't disclose this kind of information. We actually go out there every quarter and disclose what percentage of our calls are picked up within 2 minutes, because we think it's a metric that people care about when it comes to OTAs, because common grouse is that people are not able to talk to someone if they want to, or how quickly a refund is processed, right? So if it's 3 hours something for us, we actually go and disclose that, right? Because we're proud of actually bringing it down from days to hours, right? And we still think that there's scope to bring it down further. But this is an industry which was known for holding back refunds, right? I mean, if you think of COVID times, and there's a lot of CCPA action that has happened on some players for this. But I think it's important to be that transparent. I mean, we have actually gone to that level of transparency where we are disclosing these metrics every single quarter, which are customer-facing metrics.
Alok, you mentioned, travel anxiety as well as some of the meaningful offerings on your website for which you see adoption among travelers. I just want to conclude, with one last question for you, which is, in order to address some of this anxiety, according to you, what should be some of the do's and don'ts for air travelers?
I think the do's and don'ts would be largely about, it's important to have all the info at one place, ideally in one app, right? In terms of right from which terminal you're going to go to, which boarding gate you need to be present at, and what your uh, boarding time, check-in time, etc. Those cutoffs are, because actually we assume that everyone knows that the cutoff for boarding is 25 minutes, and because it's printed on the ticket, and the airline assumes that it's communicated. But I think what's needed in today's world is a reminder, right, of sorts, which, because people at times, I've seen people miss flights, right, because they were just sitting at the airport and did not realize that, they're too late to the boarding gate. Or I've seen people miss flights because they landed too late at the airport, did not account for traffic, etc. So starts from there all the way till saying, okay, when it comes to, uh, you know, meals or figuring out food, right? Is it something that they will actually get or not? Because a lot of people do not know this. Again, if they're choosing Air India versus Indigo versus, um, let's say a SpiceJet, right? What are the meal choices, and is it included or not? Again, it's something that we need to show up front. We need to let them know up front, and then a lot of it has to do with preempting problems. So problems like flight getting delayed, flight getting cancelled, and I've seen flights getting preponed at times, which is actually where a lot of friction in the industry comes from there, because like, imagine your flight got preponed and you didn't know, you didn't read that SMS, WhatsApp, whatever came there, and you turned up late, your flight is gone, right now you're a no-show. And I think in those cases it's very important that some sort of AI based calling goes out to these customers, from airlines. Even if, manually, I do understand that it's a rigorous process, but essentially every passenger needs to be informed, right? Until the time every passenger is not informed, one cannot assume that, everybody's got the memo. We've seen these cases, and I think the other thing that's a bit of a dissonance today is just the process around, modification, especially if it's a partial sort of cancellation, right, where you have two legs or three legs in a trip, and one of them is being changed. The processes are very manual today, in the entire industry. And I think thanks to COVID, at least the cancellation processes have become fully automated for most players. And some parts of the modification have become automated, but then partial cancellation, partial modification is still a nightmare for customers to figure out. I think those things need to be solved. Uh, and the customer, especially in the last few hours, if something goes wrong, needs to be able to catch hold of a real human being. I mean, yes, it's great. We all have now some sort of bots, sort of, and I mean, we have been a big proponent of that. So we have nothing against AI and adoption. I think we are actually at the forefront of that in that sense. But, at the last moment, if something goes wrong and people actually do need to talk to a human being, there should be a way they should be able to, right? And that's something that uh, we have also sort of incorporated now, that if it's a last minute use case, it should be fairly easy to reach a human to have a discussion if something goes wrong. I think these things can reduce anxiety a lot. Yeah.
Very quickly, Alok, I mean, also things to keep in mind while booking, when should I come to a portal to book? Because I really believe that the travel related stress starts much before you arrive at the airport.
No, I think you're bang on. So I think Indians are in general, like, we are pretty poor planners in that sense. Like, if I look at the average purchase duration window, right, in India is much shorter than it is in Europe or the US. So I think, and there is an upside of planning early. I can tell you with our data that you can save at least 30% of the ticket price on average if you decide to book like 30 days in advance, right? And that's something, customers are not well aware of, but and most travelers do not understand that there is so much upside there. Even from 30 days to 7 days, there's a significant difference, right? And last 3 days is obviously something you should avoid unless it's absolutely an emergency or critical. Because I mean, what I advise actually travelers to do, which is something we have products to do, that is, why don't you buy an ixigo assured fare, right, which is actually lower right now because you're buying for 30 days out, right? The fare is lower, but you're locking in the fare in that sense, right? And if you do not decide to go, you can always cancel. But if you have even a 70-80% chance of going, you should definitely uh, book early and keep that option with you, right? I mean, most OTAs now have similar options, but in our case, you can actually cancel all the way till 12 hours before a trip and get a full refund. So why would you not lock in a great fare for that long?
Yeah. Okay. So I hope that our viewers and listeners find some of those tips useful. And I do want to credit Alok as well as Exico for being very quick-footed quite often, and keeping travel worries at the center of what they do. And I will always remember how during COVID you were the only portal and the first one to come up with that sort of chart, right? What are the travel restrictions for entering into various states? Which state requires what? And much later, we saw Indigo adopted that, but you were the first one. And it was the one query that I received the most. I'm going to Kolkata. What are the requirements? What document
Yeah,
do I need to have with me? What SOPs do I need to follow?
absolutely.
So yes,
Absolutely. We were doing it for all the destinations, domestic and international. And
yes.
yeah, because we didn't have much else to do. So the least we could do was to serve our customers.
Yeah, but as Alok says, great news. Travel demand will keep growing in the next month as well, as airlines continue to add capacity. And interesting to note that demand is growing in tier two and tier three cities. Some of that demand also sparked by, unfortunately, growing levels of pollution. Thank you so much for this conversation with us, Alok. I hope to catch you again soon for a similar conversation in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jagriti. Look forward. Bye.